Agriculture has never been simple. It's shaped by weather and markets, policy and politics, forces that often originate far from the farm gate. Headlines move fast, policies shift, markets react, but the impact of those changes doesn't just show up on screen, it shows up on farms and ranches, in families and rural communities. This podcast is about taking the time to explore what's happening in agriculture and what it means for the people living it, with clarity, context, and perspective. I'm Corinne LaRue, and this is Farm Unfiltered. Renewable fuels policy is taking a major step forward this week with new guidance released on the 45Z clean fuel production tax credit, a move that could reshape biofuel markets, feedstock demand, and farm economics heading into 2026. But while Treasury's action brings long-awaited clarity, industry experts say the most consequential decisions are still ahead. Earlier this week, the Treasury Department published final guidance on 45Z, a carbon-based tax credit that replaces previous biodiesel and renewable diesel incentives beginning in 2025. Market analysts say the guidance answers some key questions, but not all of them. Joining us on this topic is Arlan Suderman, Chief Commodities Economist at StoneX. Now, I'm using clips from a 13-minute video he released about market implications of the 45Z guidelines. I'll link the full video in my show notes in case you're interested in what else he had to say.
The two pieces of the puzzle were the Treasury Department releasing the final guidelines and the 45Z funding mechanism for the biofuel program, which was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill passed this past summer. And the other piece is coming from the EPA, which will include overall the blending requirements, the small refinery exemption offsets, etc. That's the big one. This is a critical piece of the puzzle, but the big one is what's coming from the EPA.
From an industry standpoint, the release of the 45Z guidance marks a major milestone, especially for producers who have been waiting more than a year for clarity. I spoke with Tom Verry, Director of Outreach and Development for Clean Fuels Alliance America at the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo in Fargo this week, the day that 45Z guidelines were published.
Yeah, this morning the 45Z guidance was published in the Federal Register. It's something we've been waiting for over a year, so it's fantastic to see that. So what that does is give us the guidance that our biodiesel, renewable diesel producers can monetize that production tax credit.
Verry says that monetization is critical not just for fuel producers, but for farmers supplying the feedstocks behind those fuels.
The 45Z tax credit's going to have, it's a carbon-based production tax credit as far as the value. And, the different feedstocks that we use, soy, corn oil, used cooking oil, all have a carbon score. In the Big Beautiful Bill, we were able to work to get the indirect land use penalty off of soy, and so it doubled the value of the production tax credit for soy biodiesel from 30 cents a gallon to 60. So it's pretty close to the other feedstocks, which is fantastic.
Another major shift under 45Z is where feedstocks can come from, and that change has significant implications for global supply chains.
For fuel produced after December 31 of 2025, Section 45Z funding requires that qualifying fuel be, quote, exclusively derived from a feedstock that was produced or grown in the United States, Mexico, or Canada. Now, that language is strict. It says exclusively derived, no blending, no dilution, no partial compliance. Feedstock origin matters, not just processing location. The bottom line is imported used cooking oil from outside North America is statutorily disqualified beginning this year, 2026.
Treasury officials, Suderman says, were explicit about concerns surrounding imported used cooking oil.
Now, the Treasury's Department's explicit concern about used cooking oil, we call UCO, is not subtle by any means. The proposed regulations go out of their way to flag used cooking oil as a, quote, high-risk feedstock, stating that the Treasury and the IRS remain, quote, concerned about the ability to reliably distinguish between imported used cooking oil, UCO, and palm oil, and the resulting risk of crediting ineligible fuels. Because of this concern, foreign UCO pathways will not be available in the 45Z CF GREET model for fuel produced after 2025. And that GREET model is really the model used to give the carbon intensity score. And that's going to be a key now going forward.
This moment isn't unfamiliar to the renewable fuels industry. Similar periods of policy-driven uncertainty followed previous expirations of the biodiesel blenders credit and other biofuel incentives, when producers and feedstock suppliers were left waiting on retroactive extensions or delayed guidance. In those cycles, demand often stalled not because of weak fundamentals, but because plants, lenders, and farmers were unwilling to commit capital without knowing whether policy support would materialize. The difference this time is that 45Z is not a temporary patch, it's a multi-year framework. But just like those earlier expirations, the industry is once again in a holding pattern, waiting for final rules before moving from optimism to action. For U.S. agriculture, that shift creates a competitive advantage for domestic feedstocks.
And another part I think your listeners would like is that it's mostly domestic, so domestic only, or U.S., Mexico, and Canada. So that's going to give U.S. soybean-based biodiesel about a 60-cent a gallon advantage over biodiesel made by imported feedstock.
Suderman adds that removal of the indirect land use charge further strengthens U.S. soy and ethanol competitiveness.
The value of the credit is now driven primarily by life cycle carbon intensity rather than the fuel type alone. For soy-based fuels, this is a shift, and I'm going to focus more on the soy-based side of things here this morning. For soy-based fuels, this is a shift from volume-based support to emissions performance-based support. Now, what matters most for soy-based biodiesel is that soy biodiesel is explicitly eligible, but CI scores, carbon intensity scores, is the gatekeeper on this. Low greenhouse gas emission biodiesel, including biodiesel produced via trans-esterification of U.S. soybean oil, is listed as a qualifying non-sustainable aviation fuel transportation fuel under the 45Z guidelines. Eligibility requires life cycle emissions calculated using the 45Z CF GREET model. The implication is soy biodiesel does not get a guaranteed credit anymore. Plants with higher CI scores, which would be plants with older technology, higher energy inputs, etc., will see materially lower credits than efficient plants using low CI power, improved process heat, or carbon capture.
Verry says those policy changes translate directly into stronger demand at the local level.
North Dakota has 2 big soybean crush plants. This is just going to give them more ability to buy soybeans and more opportunities to sell their soybean oil into the biodiesel renewable diesel market. So we think this is one half of what we're waiting. The other half is the renewable fuel standards.
That other half, EPA's renewable fuel standard volumes, remains unresolved, but expectations are high.
The RFS volumes are projected to be 5.6. That would be huge. The volumes requirement for last year was 3.3 billion gallons, so that's over a 2 billion gallon increase.
Suderman says once EPA finalizes those numbers, the industry clock starts ticking.
Once they go to the Office of Management Budget for review, that starts the clock ticking. It generally will take an average about 3 weeks for that review, and then the EPA would be able to announce them after that. So right now, assuming the government reopens here very quickly, we're anticipating that announcement to be early March. Maybe late February, but probably more likely early March. Then the expectation would be that we would only have it's going to take a couple months for these fuel plants to get fully operational and going up to capacity. So that would leave them 8 to 9 months to do a full year's worth of blending possibilities or requirements here and mandate to hit the mandates.
Until then, both analysts say markets remain cautious but optimistic.
Now, there's still a lot of different options here that could play out. But based on the White House's tendency to use the biofuel program as a support for agriculture during this tariff war and during tough times in agriculture, it is our opinion that it will be favorable for feedstock demand and that we'll see consumption of U.S.-based feedstock will be in high demand. I'll just say it that way. And so we're anticipating that it will be bullish demand for these cash feedstock sources once it happens. But we don't know until it's actually released, and the industry's not going to make that gamble until they know for sure to know whether they're locking in profits or losses.
For now, renewable fuels policy is moving forward, but the largest demand signal is still waiting on EPA's final word. That's it for today. As always, the goal here is to better understand what's happening in agriculture and what it means for the headlines. I'm Corinne LaRue, and this is Farm Unfiltered.